You're rolling.
Welcome to episode 321 of the DFO Rundown, brought to you by Bet365, the largest sports betting platform globally. You can open an account at Bet365, and when you do, use the promo code DAILY365 to bet on a huge range of markets, including Monday Nighter and NFL. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it is never ordinary at Bet365. I'm Jason Greger, as we welcome in Frank Saravalli on the week of prospects camp getting going. NHL training camps are less than 10 days away to get rolling. So we are almost getting set for the 2024-25 season. Frankie, how you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, excited to talk Metro today, Metro Division preview. And look, it's amazing to think that less than 10 days out, there's maybe still some final touches being put on these rosters around the league. But that's sort of where we are. A couple PTOs and obviously the RFAs that need to be signed, but also a couple pending unrestricted free agents that are out there that are still talking to teams that are looking for deals that maybe aren't necessarily PTOs, holding out for contracts. So there's still some maneuvering to go before bags are unpacked and flights are arranged.
Which UFAs do you think get contracts here in the next 10 days, not PTOs?
Max Pacioretty, James Van Riemsdyk, Justin Schultz. I think that's it right now, but I'd be real surprised if those guys don't end up getting one.
Okay. Now, we mentioned the Metro preview, and then, of course, we'll have the Central, the Atlantic, and the Pacific in future episodes. So let's start in the Metro, and we're going to work our way from bottom to top last year, teams who finished out of the playoffs, and then work our way up. So we'll start with the Columbus Blue Jackets, and today, think about Johnny Gaudreau and his brother Matthew, who will be laid to rest in a private funeral ceremony today, Frank. And obviously I think it's going to be something that anybody who's dealt with losing a loved one, it doesn't just go away on the day you lay them to rest. This will be something that's will be talked about and remembered often throughout this NHL season. Obviously it'll be a challenging one, I would think, at times for the Columbus Blue Jackets. As not only was Johnny Gaudreau very well liked as a player in that team, but obviously was looked upon to be their main offensive leader, and you can't go out and replace someone like that. So I look at Columbus, and man, it was going to be a tough year, I think, for the Blue Jackets to make the playoffs, but obviously with the loss of Johnny, it becomes much more difficult.
Yeah, we talked about this last pod a little bit. How does that team come back together again? So many guys on that team were, Eric Goodbranson drove him to the rink every day last year. And he's been really open about, how much he misses John already. And Sean Monahan, just a couple days before the accident, Sean Monahan's talking about, going to Columbus and raising his kids next to the Gaudreaus. Like, there's a hole in that locker room, and it's going to be really difficult. But on the other hand, it might also be really powerful as well. This idea of, hey, let's do it for John. And I think on the whole, when we're talking purely just hockey and sizing up this Blue Jacket season, to me, this is a big development year. Let's get a temperature check on some of these big name prospects and pieces, and let's see where they fit. Where is David Jiricek? Where is Kent Johnson? Where is Cole Sillinger? Where are these guys that Adam Fantilli that are supposed to be big time prospects? I'm fascinated to see Denton Mateychuk and after his run last year, there's some really, really good pieces in this Columbus organization, but it's not all going to come together at once. But to me, that's what this year is about. I don't really care where they finish in the standings. I want an honest assessment of, let's take stock of where this team is at in terms of where they're heading, because I think they could be really good in a couple of years' time.
Yeah, I think this will be more of an opportunity for ice time and power play time for some of those young offensive players. And I look at it and I think the development of Columbus is probably going to be more about some of the individuals than necessarily the overall team, because obviously if more of the young guys are taking a step, and it's hard, right? Like, I don't expect all of them. We can always list off teams. Hey, they got, 3 or 4 young guys you're really high on, but the truth is they don't all have good seasons at the same time. And so for Columbus this year, with Don Waddell now in the fold, Frank, you know what? He looks over things, and, new coaching staff. And I would think that this season there'll be a better plan outlined as far as how they're going to use their young players.
Well, it's not just an inventory for everyone else around the rest of the league. Don Waddell has a decent idea of what these players are from hearing reports and reading reports and talking to, the scouting staff and the coaches who remained on staff. But this is also an inventory for him. He has to fully wrap his head around everything that they have as well. And I think maybe the biggest thing that I like about their offseason was, if you didn't want to be in Columbus, you're pretty much not in Columbus. Maybe the one exception is Elvis Merzlikins, but Patrick Laine, like he said, I want people that want to be a Columbus Blue Jacket. I love that he drew the line in the sand. It's like, hey, it doesn't matter if we need to take a bad deal. We're starting fresh. We are, and literally starting fresh from a cap perspective with the Laine deal. We're starting fresh and we're moving on, and we're building an organization around people and players who want to be here. And I think that's critically important. There's so much baggage from last season. They have to flush that.
Yep. Oh, yeah, 100%. And you know what? You mentioned off the top, Frank, that this might be in a very odd way an opportunity for them to really come together even more as a group because of the loss of Johnny. I think naturally, those players might have, more open conversations amongst themselves than they would have, just because that's what can happen sometimes with grief, and, opens up and guys are more vulnerable. They talk about their feelings, and suddenly they become a little bit better of a team. And so that's where I look at it. I don't expect Columbus to be a playoff team, but I'm looking to see how they're going to be as far as improvement, and specifically, the young players like, Adam Fantilli. It's a tough road in the NHL when you're a teenager. I've always said that. I definitely don't think the NHL is a teenage league, except for the rare exception. There's a few of those guys, but man, we can go through the list of players who are dominant players now, who barely could play in the NHL at a teenager, because it's just that hard. And so I think as long as you don't have too many teenagers, and some of your young guys are 20, 21, 22, it's going to make it a lot more palatable. And we'll kind of see how it goes. It's going to be, I think, an emotional season a lot of the times this year for Columbus, Frank. Obviously, their home opener will be one. When Calgary comes to town, will be another one. And I'm sure there'll be different events all throughout the year.
Yeah, it's no doubt it's going to be really difficult. No one's hiding it. No one's running from it. But this just isn't this isn't something that team should have to deal with. It's just no one's programmed to handle that. There's no playbook.
Now we move on to the team that probably would rank up there for sure in the top 3 of most disappointing regular seasons last year. Most people thought the New Jersey Devils were just going to continue on where they had been in 23 when they made the playoffs, but it didn't happen. They actually finished 7th in the Metro Division last year. And,
I can guarantee you the New Jersey Devils do not finish 7th this year.
Yeah, I would agree. 81 points last year. So didn't even get the kind of to the 500 points percentage threshold for them. But you look at the Devils, Frank, and
it's hard. It's hard to figure that they finished 6 points back of the Flyers. Like if you go back and rewind to last year's season preview predictions, there were thankfully not me. There were some people that were saying the Devils are a Stanley Cup contender. Some people had them playing in the Stanley Cup final last year.
Yeah.
Because they beat the Rangers, and everyone's thinking, okay, look at this young team. They're on the rise. And yeah, there were some unfortunate injuries for sure and happenstance. But I think one thing is really clear, Jay, to me, and we diagnosed a little bit of this at the end of the last season. They asked way too much of their young players, piggybacking off of the conversation we just had about Columbus. When you ask that much of late teen, early 20s defenseman to be half your lineup, it's a recipe for disaster.
Oh, hey, I said it all year leading in. That was my big concern. And so you look at the Devils, and let's kind of start from the back end out, because obviously they're big acquisitions. Jacob Markstrom in goal. You have Brett Pesce on the back end, Brennan Dillon on the back end, who I love him as a player. And, that guy, teammates absolutely adore him. I think he's going to be a big addition to that team. So let's kind of start there, Frank, I guess, from the back end out, and just how much stronger we think that New Jersey is going to be from goaltending to Pesce and Dillon.
Night and day difference. Every single night, all 82 games, provided that they're healthy, between Markstrom and Allen, the Devils they've solved their goaltending issues. I love that there isn't a long-term commitment to these guys either. They're both 34. Allen has 1 year left on his deal. Markstrom has 2 years left on his. They're spending a real reasonable number, basically $6 million combined for these two goalies. And they have a legit chance to win every night. Like, there's a good chance that most nights the Devils have an edge in the goaltending department. Then you look at the back end, and it's not only solved the experience issue that we talked about, and Pesce is a huge part of that, but don't forget that Dougie Hamilton, coming off of the torn pec, is going to be back. And that's a really big $9 million defenseman. So you get Hamilton back. Brendan Dillon is going to provide some significant experience. And then you've got all the time and space for Luke Hughes to grow and Simone Nemetz to grow. And he's not going to start the year in the NHL, but I'd really like to see some time from Seamus Casey at some point during the year. I know we didn't get to the forwards yet, and that's maybe the most exciting part, but I'm going to go out on a limb right now. The New Jersey Devils are the 2025 Metro Division champs.
In the regular season, you mean?
Yes.
Okay. Well, you look at just look at their back end, and Kevin Ball played 82 games last year. I'm not sure he's even in their top 6, right? This year. And you look at 3 of those 4 guys. Marino not there anymore. He played. You had Brennan Smith. The only guy amongst their defensemen who played top 4 in games played, who's here, of course, is Luke Hughes, and he played all of them. And he had a great season, right?
Kevin Ball plays for the Calgary Flames now, so that would be why he's not in their top 6.
Yeah,
anymore.
well, but Smith.
Your
Marino,
point is that if
Ball,
he was on the team, he wouldn't be in the lineup.
Yes, honestly, I'm not sold he would be. To be honest, well, I know for a fact he wouldn't be. You look at, and what I like about them is they've got their 2 young guys in Hughes and Nemec, and it likely means one of them's going to play with Pesce and one of them's going to play with Brendan Dillon.
Well, I think what's maybe the most exciting part about watching this Devils team come together this year is going to be where everyone starts this year is unlikely probably to be where everyone finishes this year. The growth factor that you see over the course of the year. I mean, they've got full NHL seasons under their belt, and now you're not a rookie anymore. You know what it's like. You've had the ability to train and prepare better for what it's like. And now let's see what you've learned. Yeah.
And then you go to their forwards, and obviously the biggest question really is going to be, the health of Jack Hughes. If he can avoid a 20 game injury, which is a quarter of the season, because everybody knows how great he was to start the year last year. Then he got injured. And obviously I think that played a role for sure in where they finished. But, I look at Hughes, and if Hughes can stay healthy, right? When to me, healthy is anybody who plays like 76 or more games. You miss a few games here, that's fine. Your team should be able to handle it. 1 game here, 2 games there, that's fine. I look at Hughes, and the other thing is Timo Meier, very quietly, Frank, in the second half of last season, started to go. He had 28 goals in 69 games, right? Like, this is a guy who had 35 and 40 goals in San Jose, and it probably took him a lot longer than the Devils were hoping, but he seemingly got a lot more comfortable, I found, in the second half of last season for them. So if you have Meier, who's maybe back to being the 30-goal guy that you expect to be, 30 goals plus, and a healthy Jack Hughes, well, that automatically is going to push you up the rankings a little bit more. Then you throw in, of course, Jesper Bratt, you got Nico Hischier, Dawson Mercer, Andre Palat, I'll say quietly, I think maybe their best forward acquisition, Stefan Noesen had a really good season.
I was just going to say, I actually think that's one of the more impressive moves they made.
Yeah. Yeah.
Back-to-back years, mid-teens in goals, 36, 37 points, and you're paying 275. Like he brings you so much more than that with his attention to detail and speed.
Well, him and Paul Cotter, I think, probably help out their bottom six a little bit. Their top guys are their top guys, and I think it comes down to, I say this all the time: if your best players play well, you got a really good chance to win. It's rare to have this surprise player who comes in on any team and makes a difference for a team that's expected to compete. You have them. I think we both have them as a top 3 team in the Metro for sure. So I look at the Devils and I expect a pretty big bounce back season from them after last year's disappointment.
Agree. When you look at the contract for Dawson Mercer and where things stand right now, what would you be comfortable with?
Ooh, that's a good question. Like Mercer had, what did he have? He had 20 goals, I think, last year, right? But he only had like 33 points. So, do you get paid for the goals? Do you get paid for the points? Right?
Well, would you rather go short term or long term? I think is the question. I mean, the year prior, he had 27 goals and 56 points.
Yeah.
As a 20-year-old.
Yeah. So let's cut it in the middle, right? Then he's basically like a 45-point player for the last 2 years, right? And you look and say 24 goals, 45 points. That's kind of what he's averaged the last 2 years. So, if we go off of the number we like to use here on the pod about, $1 million per point, well, that's about a $4.5 million salary, right? Would I do
but
that?
You're also talking that's UFA.
Yeah, with
like
projection,
we're talking
I understand.
RFA.
But I'm saying on a short-term deal, Frank, are you going to get much lower than that? Do you think?
Yeah, I think you're probably closer to 4. If I were looking at it, I'd probably say 2 times 4 is a pretty fair.
And then long term is what?
Long term, I think something like 7 times 7.
Ooh. Yeah. Like, I guess it all depends.
Might not like it now, but like, let's say, okay, he's 22 years old. He turns 23 in 6 weeks. Let's say you sign him to 7 times 7, and this year he comes out. I don't even know if they can afford that.
I think their cap space. Don't they only have just under 5 million?
They'd have to do some maneuvering, but I think for the long term, like let's say he is 7 times 7, just to play hypothetical, and he gives you, let's say he duplicates the season he had 2 years ago, 27 goals, 56 points. You're probably going to be pretty happy with the way that deal ages. Are you not?
Yeah, I think 7 would be pretty rich for me. Because if you look over his 3 years, he's basically being a guy who scored 42, 56, 3-3. Now, the thing I like most about Mercer, he hasn't missed a game. And I'm a big, the best ability is dependability. He's in games all the time on a team that has guys who have missed games and sometimes significant chunks. I think at times that can be underrated. So to me, that's a big one. I look and say, hey, this guy so far historically has shown us he's going to be able to be there every night. That matters to me. 7 would be too rich for me. 7 mils a lot. You're looking at the guy you projected him to be a 70-point guy, and he might be, but how many years is he going to be a 70-point guy? Right? Is it because if he's 56, well, that's good, but still underpaid.
Yeah, but plus you're forgetting that the cap in 3 years is going to be 100, and it's that calculation is no longer going to apply.
But do you think, Frank, that's ever looked upon as a value deal?
Well, that's what I was saying. If he duplicates what he had 2 years ago, you're not all that far off. If you're at 27 goals, you're not all that far off from 7 million in the first year of the deal. What are the last 6 going to look like? It's going to be really good.
Yeah.
But I don't, cap structure wise, like I don't think they can even do that. I think they have to go bridge.
Yeah.
Because you all like, look, you need to pay Luke Hughes. Like we talked about their young defense, but I don't think it really registered with enough people league wide that Luke Hughes, I know different impact, different minutes, different player, different everything. But Luke Hughes, if you looked at the rookie scoring last year, He had the same number of points as Brock Faber and one more goal. And he's younger. Think about
Oh,
that.
I like Luke Hughes a lot. I think Luke Hughes is the guy. And so when I look at
Oh,
Dawson,
wait a second. Why I bring that up is because Faber's already signed his long-term deal. He did 8 times 8.5 for $68 million. 8 times 8.5 for Luke Hughes would pay him more than Jack Hughes. So I wonder if, I don't think anyone ever regrets taking the security of $64 million, but congratulations. If Jack Hughes is healthy, he is the new Nathan McKinnon deal.
Yeah. If he's healthy, fair point. I look at Mercer and I say, okay, so you got Jack Hughes. He's on a big deal. Luke Hughes is going to be on a big deal. Dougie Hamilton's making $9 million. Myers I just don't see them having room. So is Dawson Mercer, if you get him to $7 million, I just don't see that realistic. I think it's more, he signs a 2-year deal and it comes in around $4 million.
AFP Analytics has it at 6 times 6.5 for long term, and they have short term at 2 times 3.8.
Yeah.
So I just spitball those numbers off the top of my head. They're not far off.
Yeah. Yeah. Just 7's a big one for me. Plus, they don't have the cap space, so I'll go with 2-year deal.
Here's the real important question, though, on the Devils. Where do they finish in the division?
Well, I have them as a playoff team, and I have them second in the division.
Okay.
So now we move up one notch from the bottom up in the Metro from last season. The team that finished with 38 wins, 87 points, and I think now, down the stretch, kind of the wheels fell off. They became a little bit more people who they thought they were. They had the worst goaltending save percentage in the league last year, second behind Ottawa. It was not a great defensive year for them, but man, they work hard. The Philadelphia Flyers. I know, Frank, it's in your own backyard, and you're like, what's going on for a team that's in rebuild? It's not a great fit for a coach that gets everything out of your team, which I understand the theory behind that viewpoint. So I look at the Flyers, and outside of
changed.
But outside of Michkov, but do you think it's changed? Like, are they that much better? Like, they added Michkov. Anybody else?
I don't think they're that much better, but I don't suddenly I think they're not in rebuild mode anymore. Like, you'd have a hard time selling to me that this team is still rebuilding.
Yeah, they're growing, but I don't view them as a playoff team. Do you?
No, I don't. I think they're going to be closer this year. Look, this entire season, the intrigue, everything about it from a Flyers perspective is all Matvei Michkov.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
There's nothing else really interesting to it. If he's an absolute stud, if he is a guy that can carry a team, step into the NHL and do it, which I wouldn't put those expectations on him. And I think the Flyers have been careful to temper those expectations as a 19-year-old. But if he's an 85, 90, 100-point player, can the Flyers make the playoffs?
No.
Yes, they can.
Yeah. I don't think so. So you got basically the two new additions are him and Fedotov in goal, and that's really it, right? And so they're an 87-point team.
But Fedotov played last year, not the whole year, but
very, very little. Look at he played a bit, Frank, but look at their goaltending situation. Sam Urson played the most game. I think Urson was the only guy who had above 900 save percentage amongst their goaltenders. So their team defense is a question mark. Did they really do anything to address that? And I look in goal. They got two young guys who, we'll see. We'll see how they do. But there's no kind of security blanket in goal for them. And maybe they don't need one. But I look at Philly, and last year they missed the playoffs by 4 points. They're going to miss the playoffs by a larger gap this season, because I don't think the low bar of 91 points is going to get you in the East this year.
I disagree.
But based on what?
I think the Flyers I think they're better than they were last year. It's hard to argue that they're worse.
No, I don't know if they're worse, but so Michkov, you believe Michkov can make them that much better?
Well, how much better can Jamie Drysdale make them?
Yeah, possibly. But when I look at like their goals against was what crushed them. Is like Jamie Drysdale, I think, is going to help them offense. Now maybe he helps them just by outletting the puck better, so they're not spending as much time in their own zone, and that's totally valid if that's the case. But I look at the Flyers and I'm like, is their defense really that much better? And I know their work ethic. I'll never question that. John Tortorella's teams, I don't care what team he coaches, his teams work hard. We've seen it. That is pretty much the one guarantee I have is the Flyers are going to work hard every night. When I look at their division, I just don't see them matching up with the other playoff teams when it comes to flat out skill level.
That you're not going to get an argument from me on that. But here's the thing. I'm just looking at the rest of the division. So I gave you a sneak peek of the top. For me, I've got the Devils winning the division in the regular season. But if you were to tell me that the Flyers are no different than the Islanders, who are no different than the Capitals, who are no different than the Penguins, that's the argument I would make.
Well, we'll get to those other teams because, there's one of those teams, and I'll just tease it, that I think is significantly different. So that'll be my tease.
So before we, I don't know if this is out there with our friends at Bet365, Tyler. Have you seen an over/under on Matvei Michkov points this season? And Jay, if not, what would you set the number at?
Man, it's a tough. I would set the number for Michkov at. Now, this is assuming he plays all the games, of course, right?
Yep.
I would set it at 59.5.
Okay. I was going to set it at 63.
Is it 63?
I would set it at 63.
Our friends at Bet365 have it all the way down at 47.5.
There you go. Man, it's hard, man. I thought I was high, even at 59. Like it's tough for guys to come in, and it can help you when you have other guys. Now, Konechny is a good offensive player. He's not a great offensive player, and that's not a knock on him because there's not many great offensive players in the league. So lots of times you kind of need a running mate unless you're really good yourself. And I think Michkov could be really good, Frank, in the future. I'm always tempering my expectations. I would always go lower. I thought 59 the minute I said it, like, God, it's probably too high.
47, I would be hammering the over.
Yeah. Well,
again, we have 19-year-old defenseman that's 18, 19-year-old defenseman that stepped into the league last year and got 47 as defenseman. I don't think that's I don't tell me why that's not an attainable target. Like, make the argument for me to take the under.
Well, I'm trying to think of the outside of like how many rookies last year had over 40, because what's it, 47 points, Cons, or did you say, Ty, 49 or 47?
47.5.
Well, there's only one player who had above that, so maybe that's why the line they picked. That was Connor Bedard. Right, but It's true. Like, Luke Hughes was under, Brock Faber was under.
Defensemen, 2 defensemen.
Okay, but Logan Cooley, 44, had 20-goal season. Marco Rossi, 21-goal season, 40 points. So now the difference being those guys aren't getting, now Cooley a little bit, but to me, Michkov, where if he's going to get over that, he's got to be on their power play unit. I expect he will be.
Of course he will be.
But that's going to be where you can break, into the 50 point, because it's kind of like, hey, do we think he's going to get 50 points or not? So, but it shows you.
It's going to be a fun wager to watch all season long. I'm telling you.
Yeah. No.
And you know what? I'll tell you what's different here. Being in this market is, for the first time in a long time, fans are excited for a season.
Oh. Because of Michkov?
Yes. And people who are casuals that don't know anything about hockey come up to me and they say, how good is this kid? Is he good?
Okay, so here's the question. So we know he can get on the power play, Frank, but how much better can he make their power play, which was a league worst 12.2%? So is he going to be a magician with all the other guys? Like, they were 12.2%. That is terrible last year. Their PP was anemic. I think they had one guy in double digits in points. So how can he help?
First off, it can't get any worse. How much better is he going to make it? Even just climbing to 20th would be a huge improvement.
Oh, God, yeah. Well, 20th would put them at 20%.
That's attainable. Like, again, we're not asking for like the sun, the moon, and the stars. But if you were to tell me, again, to make my argument, Islanders, Caps, Penguins, Flyers, I think they're all very close. I think they're all going to be within punching distance of each other at varying points throughout the season.
Yeah.
You say you think one team is different. I think I have an idea who that team is. But before we move on to another team, I would just like two things. One, a reminder that the Flyers have 6 picks in the first 2 rounds this upcoming draft, including 2 additional first-round picks, one from the Ryan Johansson deal, the Sean Walker deal to Colorado last year, and the other one, they swapped first-rounders with Edmonton last year at the draft. So it's still going to be a real, they're probably thinking that, in terms of how they fine-tune their team, but in terms of mindset now that they got Michkov, now it's on the upswing as opposed to continuing to tear down. I think is how I would like to phrase it.
And going back to their power play, 32nd in 22, 32nd in 23, 32nd in 24. You're right. It can't get any worse, but it's been really bad for 3 consecutive seasons. 2 of those years in the 12%. The one year they had a big uptick at 15. And so I hope Michkov is a dynamo on the power play. I haven't looked into what he did in Russia on the power play, but that's the area. If the Flyers want to be competitive, their power play has to improve. And even when they got to 15%, Frank, 2 years ago, that was still dead last. So
yeah,
they're going to they got to improve with wherever the league is. And as you said, try to find a way to maybe crack the top 20, which I don't know if it's that easy.
This summer, did we touch on the Travis Konechny extension or no?
Yeah, we touched on it a little bit.
I think that's such a tough contract. 8 years, $70 million, $875. I really like Travis Konechny. I think Travis Konechny is a slightly more talented version of Brendan Gallagher.
All right. Let's move one more, and then we'll get to Ty. We move up in the standings a notch to the Pittsburgh Penguins, who had 88 points, one more than the Flyers. They both had 38 wins. They were 3 points back. Sidney Crosby, his 3rd highest goal total of his career. He had 94 points. Crosby was great. The Penguins, not so much. Although they did have a better goal for ratio than both the Capitals and the Islanders. They were actually a plus team goal for against, but didn't make it. So where do you come out on the Pittsburgh Penguins, Frank, who kind of rejigged their bottom 6 forward group for sure? Do you think it's enough?
I do not.
Why?
My biggest issue with the Pittsburgh Penguins is they don't play with any pace. They are way too slow, and I don't see any of that changing this summer.
No. Well, and what's your expectation?
I love you. I love Kevin Hayes, right?
Yeah. Oh, I know.
And I know you didn't trade anything you didn't give up anything to get him, but it's not like you inserted a burner into your lineup.
No.
Your team is not getting faster.
Yeah. Well,
you've got some decent skaters, like Beauvillier is a decent skater, and Blake Lizotte, and like I think it's curious. I don't think this team's any better. I don't know what the Penguins are.
Yeah, well, they got a lot of guys. I think you mentioned Blake Lizotte. You throw in Cody Glass, you throw in Beauvillier, lots of guys who now Lizotte, I like him. I watch lots in LA, but guys who they think maybe, they can have a bounce back season. So I find in Pittsburgh, past Sidney Crosby and their top guys, there's a lot of questions and, we're kind of hoping this guy plays well, or we're hoping this guy plays well, but we don't know for sure, how solid they're going to play. Like, what do you think of, Rutger McGroarty and what he's going to do? What's your expectations for him?
I just don't. Watching Rutger McGroarty play, I don't see it. I don't like, tell me what you really like about his game. That's the part that I struggle with. Like, what's his calling card? What does he hang his hat on? the production looks great.
Yeah,
Like,
and again,
fantastic season at Michigan. Again, I don't see him in the mix, being a grinder, controlling play, and being a driver. I don't.
oh no,
So I'm not saying he's not going to make it or anything like that. I'm just saying I'm not driving the hype train. I don't this Penguins team for me is really hard to figure out. And you know what? A huge part of this season for them, whether they can bounce back into the playoffs or not, is going to hinge on where's Tristan Jarry.
yeah, right. And I said it before. I said in the summer. To me, Frank, I'm Sidney Crosby, and I know people have said there's no chance he leaves, and maybe they're right. But if they go out and you're into January and they're not in the playoff race, and your team's getting older, there's not a lot coming in the next few years. If you're Sidney Crosby, maybe you're thinking about a change. I'm telling you, I believe in if you look long term, because Sidney Crosby is going to cement himself. He is right up there in the Penguins folklore of great. Obviously, there's Mary Lemieux, but Sidney Crosby is really close. He's been unbelievable for that franchise, and everything he's done, he continues to perform very well. As I mentioned, 36 years of age, had over 40 goals and 94 points. He was 12th in scoring, for goodness sakes. So I think there would be lots of demand, and the longer it goes without a contract, the possibility is at least there.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I know. And hey, I get it.
I think
so you say you don't think so, but if you rationalize, what's the right move?
No, that's not rationalizing. That's you hypothesizing, because you're forgetting about what Sidney Crosby's actually internalizing, and you're just trying to create a narrative.
No, not.
Sidney Crosby's but that's what you just made up your own angle of what you think. I've been saying this forever, that the right call for the Pittsburgh Penguins was to cut ties with all of these super duper stars that delivered them 3 Stanley Cups and move on. It's A, not good for business, and B,
well, that's what I just said.
No, but what I'm saying, what you just said is different. What I'm saying is that's not what Sidney Crosby's thinking, and that's really all that matters. That's the departure point.
Well, I'm not saying he's thinking it. I'm saying it would be the right decision.
No, if Tyler, if you want to replay the clip, what he said was that the longer this goes on without a contract, the more that should become a reality.
No, I said a possibility, not a reality. And if I'm a Sidney Crosby, the longer it goes, you have more time to think. You're allowed to change your mind. People are allowed to change your mind. It's not like Crosby has to lock in and say, well, I've always wanted to be in Pittsburgh. I can never change my thought process on that. He can change his thought process. He could,
but I'm telling you, sources indicate he has not changed his thought process.
Yeah, I never discounted that. What I just said, the longer it goes,
you get more of a chance to look. The longer this goes, that thought process hasn't changed.
No,
the only thought process that my understanding and knowledge has been is that he isn't, whether it's 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, 4 years, the Penguins seem to this point to want to go longer term on a deal. They'd like to try and push the AAV down if they can. Crosby, to my understanding and knowledge, is more interested in, hey, let's see how this goes. I don't know how long I want to play. This is my 20th season. I've accomplished a ton. I love playing. Let's see how I feel. Let's go year. Like, I don't know that he's saying year by year, but I don't think he wants to sign his name to a 4-year deal.
And honestly, like, moving the cap hit down, like, how much is it going to go down? Like, to me, that seems like such a ridiculous thought process by the management.
I mean, I know different management group, but like, look at, like, did you see Chris Letang's contract?
Yeah, they went longer term. It didn't work. That's my point.
I think there was a period of time this summer where Chris Letang wanted out and was quietly asking around to try and get out. No. But I don't think anyone's, I don't know.
Well,
I don't know if anyone's willing to take on that contract.
If they eat some, then he probably would be.
Maybe.
No.
But
So
okay, so
do you have the Penguins as a playoff team?
I do not. I think the Penguins finish below the Flyers this season. That's my Penguins hot take.
All right.
Because first off, just look at the standings from last year. If not for the Penguins sort of surging toward the end and the Flyers absolutely falling off a cliff and dying on impact, they only finished 1 point apart, and the Flyers finished 2-8, and the Penguins finished 6-4. Like it would have already happened last year.
Yeah, it was 10-point difference in the final 10 games, actually. So they were 9 points behind them, and then they gained 10 because they got 14 points in the last 10 games of the Penguins, and the Flyers had 6. They had 8 points. So
okay, so is it really that hot of a take?
Yeah,
are the Penguins better this year?
I don't think so, but I don't think the Flyers are. I have both of them. I have them. I have those two teams finishing 6th and 7th in the division.
Okay, I think that's okay. So we're speaking the same language. I just said one's going to finish higher than the other.
Yeah. Well, hey, if the Flyers finish higher, that's another reason for Sid to think.
Okay.
Let's bring in Tyler Yaremchuk. Ty, how you doing?
I am doing good, gentlemen. Back and ready to go with a new edition of Buy or Sell, brought to you by our friends over at Bet365. You can sign up today using the promo code DAILY365. I got a couple here for you, but first I wanted to start with one that's not really a buy or sell question at all, but legendary Rangers play-by-play boy Sam Rosen had a great interview with our friends over on Morning Cup of Hockey, Johnny Lazarus and Colby Cohn. You can watch it on the Daily Face-Off YouTube. I wanted to ask you guys, because he's obviously coming to an end of a legendary career, wanted to ask you guys, who is the first, like, maybe not legendary, but who's the play-by-play voice of your childhood? Who's someone you grew up to listening, calling games? Greg's?
Well, God, I'm going to date myself here, but there was only like 14 or 15 games a year but back then, which was called ITV in Edmonton. And so you had every game on radio. And so it was Rod Phillips. And Rod, he's a Hall of Fame broadcaster. He was legendary for how fired up he'd get when things were well. He would rip on the players every now and then, which is comical. But, Rod, every now and then when he'd go off in the ref, it was hilarious to me. But growing up with him, of course, and I would say if you're looking at like a TV national person, Dick Irving was still if I go way back, was like, when you think of it, it's your youth, and it was like, oh, geez, that would be the guy. But Rod, for sure, were probably the most of it until all the games came on TV, which didn't happen, at least in Edmonton. I don't know, Frank, in Philly, if all the games were on TV. I know I'm a little bit older than you. I don't know when all the games on TV happened in Philly, but it took a while in Edmonton. It used to be always Saturday night, and it was always either Montreal or Toronto. And, I loved both of those teams as a kid, just probably because your team never got to be on TV. So you're just like, God, why do we have to watch them again?
The Flyers were one of the first teams they started their own regional sports network. Okay. It's called Prism.
But what year was that?
Oh, this was
like mid 90s?
No, this was like, I want to say 1982.
Oh, wow.
They were like way, way ahead of their time. It started in 1976, and it like the Flyers owned it, so like it was they were broadcasting all their games for a long time. So for me, it was the voice of that. It was Gene Hart. Like I can remember like stopping in my tracks as a kid, hearing on the radio that Gene Hart died. Like that's how significant of a voice he was growing up. From a national perspective, any 90s kid growing up in the US will tell you it was Gary Thorne on ESPN.
Right.
Fair. All right. I was interested to see what kind of answers I'd get out of that. Thought Frank would maybe throw me like a Phillies play-by-play guy that you listen to on the radio 100 times a year or something like that.
Harry Callis, come on. But I'm talking hockey. Like Gene Hart was like absolutely legendary.
Yeah. All right. A little bit of news out of the PWHL today. They announced the names for their 6 franchises. Last year, they just went with the cities. Montreal Victory, Ottawa Charge, Boston Fleet, Minnesota Frost, New York Sirens, and the Toronto Skeptras.
Specters.
isn't it? Scepters, like a scepter.
Oh,
It's a scepter. Like, look at the logo.
Yep,
Yeah.
I definitely wrote that down wrong. Anyways, which one? Any one of the 6
Dude,
you're
that
buying?
was like straight. Like, someone please replay that. Like, that was straight comedy. It's like that was like the scene where it's like Pamana. We were all doing the same thing, but it was all wrong.
Scepters. One
Did
of
you
those.
write it? You wrote it down SP, didn't you? Like the
Yeah.
specters.
Yeah, I did
Like
write
the
it
Mark
down.
Spectors. Is that what
Yeah.
All right.
One of the 6 you're buying on, Greg's.
I was, you know what? I was looking at their logos. I'm going to go just solely on the logo. I like the Minnesota Frost logo and I like purple. So
I like the color scheme. Frank?
I'm down with the Boston Fleet.
Ooh.
First thing I think of is Tea Party in Boston.
hey, but now, guys, if you look at the Boston Fleet logo, Frank, and
It's
you
a
turn it
Mariners-
90 degrees, does
Yeah.
it not look like the Hartford Whalers?
Oh, yeah.
Well,
It's totally
you-
the Hartford Whalers sideways, is it not?
Looks like it, yeah. It's a bead.
Kind of.
Yeah. I do like it. I like the
I
logo.
look at it as more like a Mariners trident, actually, not a Whalers W.
Yeah, I see
Yeah.
that too.
Yeah, no, I see.
Which is good. And
Like,
I like
when I
the
saw it, I was looking at it sideways. And granted, like I love the whale, so obviously I see the whale logo, greatest NHL logo of all time. But I just saw it from if you turn that sideways, it's close.
Boston Fleet. I also think of the Fleet Center in Boston, which I believe is what it was first called, the second iteration of the Garden. It works.
For back-to-back seasons, there's been exactly 4 playoff teams in every division. We haven't had a division with the 5 playoff teams. So if there's one division that you think has the best chance of bucking that trend, what would it be?
Oh, I think it's the Atlantic. Their top 4 teams are Florida, Tampa, Boston, and Toronto are good. Like Boston's had 600-point seasons in the last 7 years. Toronto's had 5. Florida and Tampa have won 3 Stanley Cups. They're all pretty good. And I feel one of like Ottawa or Buffalo, not sold yet on Detroit, but Ottawa or Buffalo, I think that team is going to push the 4th place team in the Metro.
I mean, Atlantic is the obvious answer. I think if I were to give a second one, it would be Central. I just think it's even hard to pick that because I really like all 4 teams in the Pacific. I think all 4 teams that were in last year are
in
pretty close to slam dunks to be back.
Yeah,
So then-
it is tough to see when I do think I agree that the Atlantic is probably the best call because I could see, maybe both the Islanders and Caps fall out in the Metro. I know we're working our way through that right now, and maybe the Flyers get in, then 5 from the Atlantic. Yeah, but it is interesting that it's been back-to-back seasons with kind of the dead-on parity, if you want to call it that, across all 4 divisions. Gentlemen,
no crossover.
I knew we were going to get that. I should have written.
Yeah, you should have just started with that.
Yeah.
Just massaged his prostate.
Okay,
This makes too much sense.
That's a wrap on this week's edition of Buy or Sell.
Massage his prostate. That might be the worst line of all time. Oh my God, is that terrible? Jesus. Okay, let's get to the top 4 in the Metro. All 4 actually made the postseason last year, and finishing 4th with 91 points were the Washington Capitals. And of all the teams in the Metro division, I don't think anybody's made more moves than the Capitals. Like, man, Pierre-Luc Dubois, Andrew Mangiapane comes in, Brandon Duhaime, Taylor Radish, Jacob Chikrin, Matt Roy. And then you throw in goaltending as well, and Logan Thompson. Last year, Washington, we all know their goal for differential. Like when they lost games, Frank, they got blown out. And so that made their goal 4 goals against look pretty terrible. And I look at the Capitals, and I think they've improved. They're to me, they're right on the cusp. They'll be battling with the Islanders, for 4th place, because I think the Devils are going to jump over all of them. But I'm kind of bullish. I think Pierre-Luc Dubois trade is going to work out better than a lot of people think for Washington. And I like the Caps, and I like the Caps to make the playoffs again.
Yeah, I'd actually like to amend my previous statement. I think it was unfair of me to group them with the Penguins and Flyers.
Yeah.
And the Islanders, frankly. I've got the Caps as a firm playoff team, and I think they might be able to surprise. And I think the big reason for that is how significantly they revamped their defense. Matt Roy, to me, for my money, was the best pure defender on the market last summer. You bring him in, and then the Jacob Chikrin trade, again, I don't know that it was talked about enough, but someone is going to need to explain that to me, how that happened and how the Sens only got that for Chikrin.
That Chikrin's kind of a fascinating guy, Frank. Like he was hyped up for years. Like I don't know where he was on your trade bait board every year, but he was probably in the top 5 every year. And then he never got traded. Then he finally gets traded and he goes to Ottawa, and he was okay in Ottawa, but it didn't push them over the top by any stretch of imagination. It didn't help them become really a better defensive team. But I think that was a whole team thing more than anything else, right? It's not one individual can change the whole system and fix all the holes by any stretch. So when I look at Chikrin, I agree with you. If you put him and Nick Jensen side by side, Chikrin has more tools, especially on the offensive side, without a doubt.
Dude, Nick Jensen is like, I'm not going to slag anyone. Nick Jensen is done. Nick Jensen's 34 and is on his way out, man. He's on hole 16 of his career.
Well, that's why I said Chikrin has way more tools in his toolbox.
But he's 8 years younger. Like, tell me how this trade makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I think they look at Nick Jensen and they think he's just a really good defensive defender. That's what Ottawa's thinking.
I still, it was a first and 2 seconds 1 year ago, and then he came back and played better. He had a better year in Ottawa than he did previously in Arizona. And his trade value all of a sudden becomes from first and second to Nick Jensen.
Oh, I'm not defending
Nick Jensen and a third
trade
in 2026.
Yeah. I think it was an organization, Frank, that felt like we can't come back with the same defense. So we got to find someone who can defend. And they fell in love with Nick Jensen's defending and didn't think that, you know what, over the next 5 years, who's going to be the better player?
Over the next 5 years, Nick Jensen will be out of the league in 2. And Jacob Chikrin will then be turning 28.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, I agree with you. It's a very short kind of blinders on looking right down. We need to make the playoffs this season kind of trade for Ottawa.
And you know what that does? That kills your team. It kills your organization. You cannot make sideways deals like that. This is going to go down as one of the more lopsided deals that we've seen in a long time. The fact that it was snuck in on July 1, I still don't really understand it. Like, why did you feel the need to do it then? It doesn't make sense to me. It still doesn't and won't. And I love it that much more for the Caps.
I like the Caps defense. Like their top 4, top Chikrin, Carlson, and Matt Roy. Martin Fehérváry, I think he's not a big name, but I think he's kind of underrated around the league. So I look at them. They got 2 goaltenders that they can play equally if they want them. Charlie Lindgren, Kevin Woodley a few years ago picked him as his breakout goalie. He's been bang on. Lindgren's been really good for them. But the biggest difference for me is just up front, right? I think Pierre-Luc Dubois is going to have a really good year in Washington. And I think he's going to thrive on their power play. And I like Brandon Duhaime. I think that's a fantastic. He is going to fit in there. There are going to be games where him and Tom Wilson are just absolutely irritating the you-know-what out of their opposition and going to get them off their game. I really like that sign.
And then you add in the fact that Brandon Duhaime is one of Jacob Chikrin's best friends.
Oh, even better.
Home run. Both played together playing youth hockey in Florida.
Where do you have them finishing in the Metro?
I have them 4th.
Me too. Now we move up to the New York Islanders, made the playoffs last season, had 94 points, 39 wins, one fewer win than the Capitals, but they had 16 overtime losses last season for the New York Islanders. And, Frank, they don't make a ton of moves. Well, because they've had guys under contract for so long, but, they did bring in Anthony Duclair. What do you make of the Islanders who maybe are not the sexy team, but as they showed last year, right? Like Noah Dobson had an unreal. He's probably the least talked about defenseman in the league who's very good. And I think that's Noah Dobson. Pelech and Pulock, I like their D. They're top three for sure. Obviously Sorokin in goal. Thank you. Even though, at times last year, like he's not starting the playoffs, it's a little bit odd, but what do you make of the Islanders? Where do you see them this year?
I don't know what the Islanders are. They have an elite goalie. They have very little support. I feel like they are like I don't know. I'm trying to say this in a way that people will connect and resonate with. They are the definition of mid. It's true. Like they're not going to be awful.
On next too, or what?
Yeah, I mean, it's the Steve Buscemi, how do you do, fellow kids, holding the skateboard. But they're definitely not going to be terrible, and they're definitely not going to be elite. They're the definition of mid. Like
yes.
I think a lot needs to go right for that team to get back in the playoffs this year.
I'm kind of fascinated just about the whole goaltending situation there. And it's funny because like their head coach is a former goalie. Like I think he has high expectations of Sorokin,
who obviously loves Varlamov from going back to their days in Colorado.
Yeah. Like you look like Brock Nelson and Bo Horvat, Frank, like what they have 34, 33 goals, like pretty good years for both of those guys last season. Like Brock Nelson's a pretty competitive, not competitive. He is competitive, but he's a pretty consistent producer for the Islanders. I like him, but you're right. Like,
what are the odds that gets duplicated again?
Well, I could see Brock scoring 30 goals again. That wouldn't shock me. Right? Like he didn't score 40.
So his last 3 years, 37, 36, 34.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe it's 32 this year,
And I mean, Bo can get there again. 31, 31. Sorry, 31, 38, 33. I'm just saying there can't be any slip up in those numbers. It's not like those guys can't drop down to mid 20s. They're just, there's no margin for error.
No, it's true. Like they need a lot of their guys. It's not like they have a young guy that they think is going to come in and take an extra load. They really look at their guys. They don't have anybody really, really elite, although Dobson's close as a defenseman. Like Matty Barzal's a really good player, but he's not elite in my eyes.
He doesn't have the proper support.
Yeah. So if they have one injury to the wrong guy, I think it's going to be tough. They'll compete, but they're, to me, like the Flyers, just with a little bit more top to bottom. Definitely infinitely better goaltending. But so that's why I have them head there.
They're another team that the final numbers of last year, they fool you a bit. Like you look at the standings, you're like, all right, 94 points, squarely in the mix, but they finished 8-1-1. They ran away from the rest of the pack. They were grouped in that same mix as the Red Wings and the Penguins and the Caps. Like they were in that same, mushy middle all season long until they pulled away at the end. And then what?
No. They're, I have them 5th in the Metro this year.
They did win a game in their first round series, but 1/16 of the way there. That's my biggest issue with the Islanders moving forward is it feels like whoever is, and I'm not saying this about Lou Lamoriello. It feels like whoever is above him is asleep at the switch. What is tell me what the plan is for this team moving forward.
Yeah. It's just to compete in the middle ground. That's what I see.
That's tough.
Yeah. Where do you have them?
I have them 5th.
So now we move to team finished second last year. The team that, man, they made some significant changes, but I'm not necessarily sold it's for the better in the Carolina Hurricanes, who are obviously, they're consistently a good team, Frank. I think we can all, every year, the Hurricanes, Rod Brindamore and that team, they show up, they're good, but like offense has always been a little bit of their issue. And I wonder how much they lost. They did have 111 points last year. They had 52 wins, like a really good team. I have them as a pretty much a lock as a playoff team. But, you look at like Roslovic, Carrier, and Yost are replacing Teravainen and Gensel, and then Shea and Pesci with Gostisbehere and Walker. Like, I think they've downgraded a lot of positions.
I think the Carolina Hurricanes subtracted somewhere between 8 and 11 points off their team in the standings.
Yeah.
I think they are a 100-point to 103-point team that is going to need to work more than they've worked previously.
Yes.
They're just not as talented as they were.
No.
It's not going to be as effortless and efficient as it was. And I still think from a goaltending perspective, like I still have some real questions there too. Like Kochetkov, he ended up playing the bulk of the workload again. Not again, but for the first time. And then what? How do you feel about Freddie Anderson?
Well, I feel
it's hard to argue with his numbers once he came back, but then he got to the playoffs and was no bueno.
Yeah. No. Like I agree with you. Like Carolina's a playoff team, but for at least right now on paper, they don't look as dangerous as they have the last few years heading into the season. That's how I view Carolina.
I'm really excited to see Carolina's young guys. Bradley Nadeau, fascinated to see where he slots in and what that looks like. Jackson Blake, I think is knocking on the door. What does Scott Morrow look like? I mean, they've got some really interesting pieces along the way that I think, to me, that's still, if you want to rewind the tape, that's what makes the ability to go out and get Jake Gensel and then not re-sign him, which I think was a dagger for them. They were planning on keeping him and felt like they did everything they could to try and get that done. But I still think that's a worthwhile gamble every time, because I don't think they gave up any of their top 6 or 8 best prospects to go trade for Gensel. And it was still ended up being a second-round pick anyway.
No, it was good for sure. And I think, like, for me, the challenge in Carolina has been a really good team. They've never really had like a game breaker difference maker. Sebastian Aho is really good, but I think 89 is his career high that he had last year, which is awesome. But they lost their 3rd highest scorer, their 6th highest scorer, and their 8th highest scorer last year. All gone in Teravainen, Brady Shea, and Stefan Noesen. And when I look at the guys now, Gostisbehere probably can replace Shea's offense. I don't think he can replace his defensive game. Roslovic, Yost, and Carrier, they're definitely not replacing Teravainen, and they'll be in tough to even replace what Noesen brought for them in the whole overall role. So you're right. They're just going to need somebody else to, Svechnikov, who's been really good, is going to have to be even better. And it's the guy for years, Frank. I've said it, that offer sheet, I never liked it from day one. I didn't like the contract extension, but Kotkaniemi at some point has to become what they've been paying him to become.
I think you're hoping against hope right now.
Yeah,
it's been a while. Sure. And don't underestimate the loss of Jesper Fast for the entire season with neck surgery.
That hurts for sure. So I have them 3rd.
I just think there's going to be interesting stress tests for this team. Like, you're asking a lot of Dmitry Orlov this year. You really are.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's fair. So
I have them 3rd as well.
Yeah, same as me. So
that means we both have, well, not both. Where that means you have the New York Rangers 1 and I have them 2.
Frank, that is correct. Yes, I have the Rangers at the top of the division. Once again, them and the Devils, and Carolina 3. I think those are my 3 lock teams for the regular season playoffs. And you look at the Rangers, and you know what? Not any major changes. You know, they bring in, you know, Riley Smith, Sam Carrick, you know, I think Zach Jones, maybe, you know, Roslovic, Gaudreau, and Gustafson. So not any significant changes. And like the Rangers are a good team. So I get why they didn't have to make any, you know, monumental changes on their team. You have them second, I guess. What is it that has the Devils leapfrogging them all the way?
I think the Devils, it's an amazing thing to say now. I just think they're a little bit deeper. And I really like the Rangers back end and have been, you know, hyping that up the last few years. And I also think just the style of play, though, I think the Devils are going to be a super fast team this year and still have a lot of room to grow. I think it's really close. I think the Rangers, it's an interesting question. Like, who has the better top end talent, Rangers or Devils?
Yeah. Well, it's still kind of got like Artemi Panarin last year had an unreal season, right? 49 goals, 120 points, 43 more points than his next closest teammate in New York. Like you know what? He was great.
He was on my heart ballot.
Yeah, same with mine. I think he finished fourth. I can't remember. I think he was fourth.
He finished fifth.
Did he finish fifth? Okay. He had an unreal year. Now we go to the playoffs. Alexis Lafreniere, Frank, that seemed to be like kind of the coming out party. He was an absolute force. Now, when you look at his numbers from 57 points in the regular season, the vast majority of them 5-on-5, I think he only had 6 power play points, right? Like they had their top unit power play guys on the Rangers last year. And it was pretty much Panarin and Trocheck and Kreider and Fox and Zibanejad, right? Those were the guys who produced the majority of their power play points and got the most minutes. I'm wondering on Lafreniere and what the organization saw from last year in the postseason when it mattered most to say, okay, maybe we got to get him more opportunities in the regular season. That's kind of what I'm looking for in New York, is just to see if we see an elevation in significant minutes for him.
I think you should. There's a lot of offense there. A lot of 70-plus point scorers, and I think Lafreniere can join that group. You think Matt Rempe can hold down a spot all year?
I think I've been reading like Rempe can skate for a big man. He skates pretty well, and I'm curious. He's talked about now he wants to get a little bit. Can he be in their third unit penalty kill? That's something that he's looking for, because obviously, you know what, any player, I don't care what your role is, it's harder if you're not on any special teams unit to stay in the game. It just is for any player. You're a third line guy and you're not on either unit. Your minutes are diminished. Can sometimes, depending on the game, you can kind of never get into a flow. And so I'll watch, but I think Rempe, we obviously know he can handle himself physically, and he'll do that if need be. But he's a huge fan favorite, Frank. Like, you know, it kind of reminded me of the old school 80s days with the Rangers last year, when fans, like, they love the tough guys, like love them. And to the point of Rempe, like he just came in, he was like instant fan favorite. And it was fun to see. I liked it. I do think he's going to play the majority of the games for the Rangers. And, you know, I think you're going to see a little bit of an uptick in his time on ice per game too.
Well, the fans loved him, but more than that, I think Peter Laviolette, it was pretty obvious that he loved him too. So you're going to see him in there. Before we wrap, so you've got Rangers 1, I've got Devils 1. We're pretty close to an agreement on playoff teams. You wrote a big story on Daily Faceoff last week looking at some schedule quirks. Anything to keep an eye on in terms of the Metro Division?
Well, the interesting thing about the scheduling when I dove into that article was just how some teams at different times, Frank, they'll go like a whole month where they play like 15 games in a row where they're never in the same city. Now you're back home for one, then you're out on the road for 2-3, then you're back home for one. Obviously the Eastern teams, well, except Florida and Tampa, a lot of the Eastern teams don't have, ridiculous amount of travel time by any stretch of the imagination. So that's good. But if going off top of my head, because man, I spent almost too much time went down a rabbit hole and just kind of, was nuts. But I guess the thing that maybe stood out, Columbus has, in theory, based on travel, the amount of times they play back-to-back games, and then the amount of times they play a team on the second half of back-to-back. Columbus has 18 games, tied for the most in the NHL, where they're playing an opponent who's on the second night of their back-to-back. So they actually have that. The Devils have 17 of those. And that might be the difference. Like, we have the Rangers and Devils 1-2. I look at that. The Islanders and the Devils both are at 17, whereas the Rangers only face a team 10 times on the second half of a back-to-back. And if you think both of those teams are that close, which I think we agree on, that might be the difference, right? Because I know they crunched the numbers a few years ago. Your math on that facing a team on the second half of a back-to-back, now, depending on travel, there's lots of other things that it can be an advantage. And so that's probably the one that really stood out to me, was just the difference between the Rangers and the Devils specifically, because I had them as 1-2, and how many more games the Devils have where they're facing a team on the second half of a back-to-back. So, and I think of the teams in that division, like, Pittsburgh has the least amount of distance travel. Like, the Metro division overall has Washington is 6th, Pittsburgh is 1st, the Flyers are 5th, the Rangers are 4th, the Islanders are 8th, Columbus is 3rd. The Devils are the only team not in the top 10 least amount of travel. They're 12th, but it's not by much. They're still under 40,000 miles. And so that was from TJ Stats. I just want to give him credit. TJ Stats on Twitter. He was the one who calculated that. But the Atlantic division by far has the least amount of travel of any division in the NHL.
So if you were to rank the divisions 1 through 4, you think in terms of perceived strength, and I'm not saying at the top, but top to bottom, I think for me, the Metro is 3rd. Where would you come out?
Yeah, the Atlantic's probably 1 for me, I think, top to bottom.
Yep.
Yeah, they might be. See, the problem with the Pacific has, 4 really good teams, but then, like, San Jose and Anaheim at the bottom are not good, right? So that kind of weakens them. But the Metro and Central, yeah, I could see the Metro being 3. It's probably a coin flip between those two, right? Because the Central, like, Minnesota's always competitive, Frank. St. Louis, Colorado, Winnipeg, Dallas, of course. So, yeah, you know what? You're probably right. I'd probably have Central 2nd and them 3rd. On paper, obviously that can change as the season goes, but right now, today, I'd probably have them ranked that way. You?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So
this was it was a great breakdown.
Yeah, no, I like that. The Metro fans, we'll get to we'll do the Central on our next pod, and then we'll go to the Atlantic, and then we'll finish with the Pacific Division. That's the DFO Rundown, episode 321, brought to you by Bet365. Get in the game. Use the promo code DAILY365, and good luck. Have yourselves a great week. We'll talk to you next week.